Okay, so we're going to get started with exercise 215 today, and today's the first time where we actually start to have some environment, some context in our files. And so we're going to work through that today. We're actually going to put this building in the city of San Francisco, and then we're going to give us a sky for a background. It's not going to be the most photorealistic sky. It'll be a gradient of color, but we're on the right steps. So the first thing that I've done today so far is I've gone ahead and I've opened up my building from last class. So it's exactly the same, and I want to spend some time prepping the file, getting it ready to insert it into the city of San Francisco. So now's our time to really kind of clean it up, make sure the texture mapping is working, and that sort of thing. So yeah, last class we established a basic directional light, we established an infinite plane as part of our setup here. I'm going to go ahead and get rid of both of those because I'm going to end up using this building as a block reference. So I'm going to clean everything up. I already have skyscraper, floors, skin, ceiling, and core materials applied, but the environment and its sublayers I don't need, so I'll go ahead and hit the X here to delete those layers. Yes, go ahead and delete those objects. And then I also had a holdover here of my old buildings, all of those pieces. I don't need them anymore either. So I'll click on the buildings and then get rid of them. Yeah, you can go ahead and delete those. And I'll also get rid of layer 5 here. So I want to be as clean as I can be. So I just have the skyscraper and then the floors, skin, ceilings, and core. I'm going to take my building and I'm going to move it from this point to 0.00. So I'm going to go ahead and type move. Oh, I need to turn on my snap here. And we'll move it to 0, 0, 0 to put it at the origin. Z for zoom, S for selected gets me to where I'm seeing just the building. I have not turned off my OpenGL just yet, so that's going to be problematic. Let me go ahead and do that. I'm going to go to Tools and then Options, and under View, I'll click on OpenGL and turn off that GPU tessellation, and that'll let me see my building correctly. So now I have my building. It's on 0, 0, and it's time to double check my various materials to make sure they're applying correctly and at an appropriate scale for the building. So I'm going to turn off everything but the skin for right now, so we'll concentrate just on the skin. And the skin, if I remember correctly from last time, has a material already applied to it. Let me open the VRay Asset Editor here. I'll go to Materials, and I had two different options for skin. I used the glass tinted black, and I also used the skyscraper light. I'm going to go ahead and use the skyscraper light for my material for this particular building. I also have the skyscraper dark. If you'd rather use the dark material, either one of those can work. I'm going to right click on it and say apply material to layer, and it's going to go on the skin layer. I may have already had it, I don't remember from last class. And if I were to switch to my rendered view temporarily, it really doesn't look right. I'm not seeing too much to my skin here. So I'm going to go ahead and start to work with some texture mapping, see if I can make this appear a little bit better. So let's go ahead and select the object. There it is. I'm going to go over to texture mapping. So I'll click on my properties, go to the texture mapping option, and my building is roughly a rectangle. So I'm going to go ahead and use box mapping for it. For some of you, you have more complicated shapes, in which case sometimes you have to work with the texture mapping a little bit more. I'm going to go ahead and use the bounding box, world, and we'll go ahead and cap it, yes. And now I have my texture map. It still doesn't look really spectacular just yet. So let me go ahead and show my mapping, in which case we'll get a box representative of my mapping. Now this particular material, the skyscraper light or the skyscraper dark, both were designed around a little 4-foot interval. So I'm going to actually scale this so that this box is much, much smaller. So I'll use scale 1D to control how I'm scaling this. So the first one here, I'm going to snap from that point to that point, and I'm going to bring this and make it a little bit smaller. We'll do it at 4 feet. Then I will again scale 1D. And we'll do from, let's see here, this front point. No, we can do it from the back. We'll do it from there to there, and that is also going to be 4 feet. And then I'm going to scale my height to be one of the floors. So I will again scale 1D, and I'm going to go from the bottom here all the way up to the top, and that will be 16 feet, which was my floor-to-floor height. And so I end up with this nice little, oops, I didn't scale it correctly. Let's try that one more time. Scale 1D. Could I have done this scale 2D? Sure, but I think 1D gives you a little bit more control over how you're scaling. 16 feet. There we go. So now I have this set as a much smaller piece. The advantage of setting this is there's little pieces of this particular material that aren't that are not transparent like glass. They're a little bit more solid, so you end up seeing a repeating pattern. I don't know why it's not showing up on this particular material. Actually, I can load the dark, and let's see if the dark one shows up a little bit better. Let me go in and to my VRay materials, and let me go ahead and load up the dark and see if it shows up better on the projector here. I'll right click and say apply to layer skin. And it looks like in both cases my preview really doesn't show these particular pieces. That's unfortunate. We'll see if it in rendered form works a little bit better. I'm going to go ahead and turn on my floors here so that I can see those floors. And I'm going to move this texture map, snap to that corner, so that it's up on this first floor. I know the bottom's going to be a little problematic because it's bigger, but we're going to move it up so that it's on that floor. This will establish our texture to be the right size for the floor itself. At this point, I'll go ahead and hide the texture map, and I'll trust that it'll work correctly. We'll come back to it in a second. And I want to look at the floors. They're on. Let me turn off the skin. There we go. I'm going to look up at the top here and see if the texture for the floor is right. Doesn't really look quite right yet. So I'll select all of the objects, and I'll go into my texture mapping again. So I'm going to apply let's do a planar mapping for all of these. That'll be coming down from the top. So we'll bounding box, world, just a U and V, that's fine. If we look at it, it's a little bit better, but the scale is still off. So let's take all of those, and let's come down here to the UVW repeat. We'll lock it, and we'll do it at about, let's try 5. Let's see if that's a little bit better. Yeah, the scale seems a little bit better for the scope of this. It may need to be a little bit more. I might take those, and I might go up. Let's try 10. Let's see what that one looks like. Yeah, it seems a little bit better. So I'm just looking at it, trying to double check what feels right. So I've got that established. We can go back to my layers. I could turn off the floors now. I could turn on the ceilings. Pretty hard to tell what the textures look like. We'll just go with those. Let me turn on the core. And the core shouldn't be glass. It should be some kind of a concrete. So it looks like I applied the wrong material. So we'll go in here. Let me apply material to layer. There we go. And again, I have to do the texture mapping. So we'll go back to my properties here. We'll go to texture mapping. We'll do a bounding box. We'll do world, and we'll go ahead and cap it. Over here, I'm going to do x equals y equals z, so at least the textures all match. And then we'll change the repeat. Let's do it at like 10. And that feels a little bit more like an appropriate scale. So at this point, I can turn back on my other layers here and build back up my building. This topmost surface, sorry, it is currently on the skin layer. I'm going to go ahead and explode it, and I'll take that top surface that is currently glass. I don't want that to be glass. We'll go ahead and apply the floors. I'm going to change it to the floors layer so that we have a concrete texture on the very top. Likewise, the very bottom surface, right there, I'm going to change to a floors layer as well. There we go. So now this whole building is ready to bring in to a scene. So let me switch back over to shaded so we can see it. Yep, looks good. I'll go to File and then Save, or I could do a File and Save As and move it into today's folder instead of last class. So let's go into 215, and we'll go ahead and save it. Perfect, so that's ready to bring in. The next piece of the puzzle that I need is the city of San Francisco. So I've gone ahead and I've pulled up exercise 215. This is today's exercise. And under part 2, download sfdowntown.3dm. So this was a file, and this will actually take you to Dropbox because it's a rather large file. It's faster for Dropbox to send it to you than for me to. You don't have to sign up for Dropbox. You can just go to direct download and you'll be able to download the file. This was a file that was made by some of the students. It was some of the grad students at Berkeley, probably 10 years ago, maybe a little longer than that ago. So it's not perfectly accurate to what the city landscape looks like today, but it's reasonable. Unfortunately, they made it out of a mesh, and that mesh makes it a little bit harder to work with and a little bit heavier, but I don't have another model to work from, so this is what we're going to work from. So I've gone ahead and I've downloaded, excuse me, I'll go ahead and open it up in Rhino. And there it is. If I orbit and zoom out here, we can see the city. There we go. There's some pieces that are kind of floating out there, but I've put our site right down here in downtown with a bunch of other buildings around it. What we're going to do, because it's pretty hard to do a photorealistic rendering of all the buildings around, we're going to take the city and just make it all white. So it'll be kind of a glossy white texture, and then we'll put our building in and render our building against the glossy white. And I think this is a pretty good strategy when you're doing renderings sometimes to just isolate what you want people to focus on. So in this case, we're focusing on our building and forget the rest of the buildings. So if we look at my layer structure here, I have the San Francisco model, and I have a building site. And I deliberately put a building site here for you, so you have a place to snap to so that your building can sit nicely in this particular context. The other thing that I have is I have two views that are established for you. So if you go to your views here, you go to Set View, I have Perspective 1 and Perspective 2. Ultimately, I'm going to ask you for a third perspective, but for today, Perspective 1 and Perspective 2 are street level, looking down the street at your building. So in both cases here, if I go to Set View and I go to Perspective 1, oh, sorry, let me go to Set View, Perspective 2, it's another example looking at the bottom of your building. So at this point, I'm going to bring in my particular building as a block reference. So we'll go ahead and go to Edit, Blocks, Insert Block Instance. And this works the same way as all the rest of the blocks that we've worked with. So it's a reference file. I'm going to browse for that file that I just saved. So it was in today's folder. And it was that file there. I'm going to link it as a reference. So I'm making sure I check those two boxes. So it is linked as a reference. We'll go ahead and say OK. These options are fine. OK. It's going to ask me where I want to put it. So I can zoom out a little bit so I can look down at my building here. And I'm going to, let's see here, I'm going to put it right there. Then I need to rotate the building. So I'll type rotate. It's not a rotate 3D, it's just a regular rotate so that I can get on axes. This is on Market Street, so it's on that diagonal going through San Francisco, so I need to move it around to there. Now it looks like the, call it the fun side of the building, is facing away from where I wanted it to be. So it might be worth going back and flipping the whole building around so that I have better organization. The other thing I could do is I could put this corner, at least as a start, I could put this corner right there, and then I could rotate the whole building again, like that. That at least gets the kink to the front side of the building. But again, I could play around with it and I can evolve it. And you guys may decide that you want to evolve it too, once you figure out where the context is going to be and where the building is going to be. So when it comes to rendering, I said we were going to make all of this background kind of a default color. And so we'll go into our VRay asset editor. And the color that I think works nicely is a white porcelain. I don't know in the current version if they have white porcelain. Hold on a second. Ceramic and porcelain. Here we go. They do have a white porcelain. So you could use their white porcelain instead of my white porcelain. It doesn't make any difference. We'll go ahead and right-click on it and say Apply Material to Layer. And it's going to be the SF Model layer. It's also going to be applied to my base, my building site. So it's applied to both of those. That essentially makes the entire backdrop of this white. And then my building has its materials already applied to it. We can see those right here under my skyscraper. So now that we have those applied, we have our materials ready, it's time to think about the sunlight and sky system. Now I do know that I deliberately skipped a few steps, step 5 and step 6 under part 2. That has to do with the VRay mesh object. I will come back to those. You don't have to do it. It's kind of an optional step. I will introduce the concept to you guys today, but sometimes it crashes when you try to do it, and sometimes it takes forever to create the proxy object. So no reason to make you wait now. We'll finish everything else, and then I'll come back and show you that part of it. So I have this ready. I'm going to go ahead and save this. So let me go to File and Save As. And I want to put it in today's folder. The mesh file, the San Francisco file, is a pretty large file, so it tends to slow things down a little bit. If you're struggling with moving around in your object, you can always turn off the San Francisco city model background, and that'll let you work with your objects a little bit easier. Okay, so I've gone ahead and I've saved it. So the next piece of this is to understand how to insert a sun and pick a specific time of day for this particular scene. So to do that, I'm going to come up to the VRay toolbar here, and I'm going to click on the sun icon. This opens the sun creation panel right here. I should also point out that I have updated the tutorials on the course website. So if you go to tutorials and you go to VRay and you come down here, we're going to be working today with 8.17 for sun, 8.18 for sky, and 8.19 for the physical camera. So all of those are worked out. So everything that I'm about to do is written out right here, so you can go in and double check. So I've gone ahead and I've started the sun creation toolbox. So here we go. Right there, I click on the sun icon, and then I get the sun angle calculator dialog box. I want to make sure that manual control is unchecked because I don't want to manually have to control the sun. And I'm going to scroll down to the bottom under location. You can minimize these little pieces as you get to just location. That's certainly an option. Now when it comes to location, I'd like to get something close to where San Francisco is. Now it happens to have San Francisco already built in, so I just have to start typing San Francisco and it will show up. I'm going to make sure that it's highlighted in blue. That effectively is picking San Francisco as my point. Apparently you can click the here button and it's supposed to figure out whatever's closer to you. I don't know that that works just yet. So I've gone ahead and I have a location. The next thing is to expand date and time. This is where we're picking a date and a specific time of day. So we're in October, it's today. We're going to pick what time of day. I tend to like it either early morning or late afternoon. I think the shadows get a little bit better. It makes the rendering more exciting. So I tend to pick one of those times. So early in the morning or late afternoon. Right now we are on daylight savings time, so I'm going to check the box for daylight savings time, which shifts the clock. So that's good. And once I have those set, I can go ahead. I don't have to worry about sun position because it automatically adjusted. You can see when I change the time of day, the sun position and angle, the azimuth and altitude are changing. So it's much easier, in my opinion, to pick your location and then date and time than it is to figure out what your azimuth and altitude should be for the sun. So we're going to use it to our advantage here. When I'm done, I'll go ahead and click the OK sign. And one of the big mistakes people make when it comes to sun is they don't actually put the sun in the scene. They go through the options and they select what date and time it is, but they never actually click in the scene to install the sun. And so here, in my opinion, you have two options. You can put it at the origin at 0.00, or you can snap it to something where you know where it is. So in my case, I'm going to snap it to my building. So I'll come to this upper corner here, and I'll go ahead and just click on that upper corner, and it will snap my sun right there to the upper corner of the building. So let me deselect that here. That blue object, now it's highlighted in yellow, is now my sun as it's coming in. Now, if I find that I really don't like the sun in its current position, so one of my two renders are going to be such that I probably want to light the other side. Really, I should have had morning sun. If I want to change the sun, if I click on the icon for the sun, there it is, and I go to my properties, one of the options here is the light properties. And when I click on that, I can go in and I can edit the sun. So if I click on this edit button here, it's going to bring back the sun options and sun position. Now you say, wait a minute, how do I know what these values are? Well, here's where you can uncheck manual control and gain back things like your location, etc. So I'll open up location and I'll go back through and I'll type in San Francisco. So same process here for San Francisco. I'll select it so it's highlighted in blue. I'll come back up to my date and time. It's daylight savings time. We want it to be in the morning. There we go. Today's date is just fine. We'll go ahead and say OK. And it's going to edit and manipulate my sun to change. So you can always go in and change the sun. The other thing about the sun is if I have it selected, I can click on this Edit in VRay Asset Editor. And what this does is it shows me the sun and any other lights that I have installed in the scene. This is something that's new in this version of VRay compared to the old version of VRay, and that is that I can actually double-click on the name of the sun, and I could add an extra description. So I could, for example, put in today's date, 10/16. It's the 16th, right? Yeah, it's the 16th. 10/16. Oh, it won't let me do special characters. How about a dash? 10/16, 19. And if I paid more attention, I might know that it was 8 a.m. I don't know. The point is I could put more information in. The reason that this matters is I could create suns for different times of day and do different renderings based on which sun was on and which sun was off. I can also turn on and off a particular sun by putting it on its own layer and turning it on or off. Or I think I can, yes, I can click on the sun icon right next to the name and turn it on and turn it off that way. So I could actually do multiple renderings for different times of day with different suns installed. So something important to kind of be aware of. So now that I have that, I've got my sun. The next piece of the puzzle is installing a sky. So if we've worked before, if I go to the VRay, again, I'm in the VRay Asset Editor here. If I click on the gear icon right there, it brings up the VRay settings. And we've worked before in the VRay settings, and you guys have expanded the setting for environment. Previously, we clicked on the background color and changed the background color to white, for example. Like that. Well, instead of using a background color, we want to use a background sky. And so if you were looking out at the sky, of course today's a cloudy day, so it's not as good of an explanation. But if it was a perfectly sunny day, there would be a gradient of color that goes from lighter at the horizon to darker blue as we go up. And that has to do with the atmospheric effect and whatever. It doesn't really matter the technicalities, it's just an observation. Rhino can mimic that based on the time of day of your sun. So it can adjust what the gradient would be in the sky. So we want to do that. And in order to do that, I'm going to work here with the background first, and I'm going to come over to this little checkerboard pattern. And when I click on that checkerboard pattern, it's going to do nothing. Love it, right? Oh, come on. I promise you, I've gone through this several times to make sure that this is what I'm doing. And of course, it's not working. Let me save it and open it again. See if we can get it to work here. All right, let me make sure nothing's selected here, and then let me try that one more time. Oh, come on. Oh, I love it when things don't work. So nice. Okay, sorry, I apologize. I'm going to close Rhino altogether, and then we'll start this whole thing over again. This is ridiculous. Well, let me pick either one. All right, well, I got to figure out what's wrong. So bear with me for a second while I sort this one out. So I have no idea why, but it was being cranky about it. So I right-clicked on the checkerboard, and when I did that, I could select clear, and then I could go back and click the checkerboard, and this opened. I did this yesterday and didn't have to do that. So I don't know why it was forcing me into doing that. Anyway, once I've done that, it's going to open up the ability to select a different type of background. So we've done color before. If I come down here, there's one called sky. If I click on sky, that's fine. It's going to use settings based on what my sun is in the scene to determine what the sky looks like. So under sun, I have to make sure that my correct sun is selected. And this is where renaming that sun so that you know which sun it is can be useful. So in this scenario, I'm going to use the sunlight for 8 a.m. And so that's picked as the sun. The rest of these options are just fine. So I can scroll down here. Everything else is fine. Even under options, those are all fine as well. So I have everything selected. I'll click on back, and I now have an environment that's going to have a blue sky behind it, and it's tied specifically to the sun that I have in the scene. And that's the important thing. So you create the sun first, then you create the sky environment background. So I'm going to go ahead and close this for right now. So my VRay asset editor is done. I'm going to go in, and I'm going to look at my view. So let me go to set view, and I'll go to perspective 1. To start, there's my view. We can see the building there. Obviously, it's cut off in my view. So before I perform a rendering, I need to kind of think through what's happening and am I going to get the view that I want. So if I go back into my VRay asset editor here and we go into my render output right here, right now I have an image width and height of 320 by 240. It's set up with an aspect ratio of 4:3. Sometimes you'll convert this to, say, widescreen, or sometimes you'll convert it to match viewport. So what you see is what you get during the rendering. In this case, I want a rendering that's much, much taller and much narrower in size because I want to see my whole building. So when I do that, I'm going to go to custom here, and I'm going to set my image width. Let's do it at 100. I'm going to do these as small numbers. And we'll see if it'll let me fix this one to like 400. No, it's forcing me into this. All right, so let me do it at like 0.3. That's 400 high, so I'm rendering tall and narrow instead of the other way around. I'm doing these as really small numbers, so my initial rendering is going to be small until I confirm that it looks the way I want it to look. So now at this point, if I were to go ahead and start a render, which is not using the dimensions that I want, let's try that again. There it is. Now it's doing the dimensions that I want. If I were to start this render, there's a good chance that my rendering is going to either be too dark or too light based on the settings. There we go, it's starting. And so I'll let this go for a little bit, but it looks like it's actually not too far off. That's probably because I pre-did a few of the settings so that you wouldn't have to. And so I'm doing this kind of test to kind of see. If the rendering appears too dark or too light, there are some options that we can adjust. So I'll let that one keep going, and I'll show you where these options are. So first thing is under camera here. We need to make sure that the camera is turned on, which it is. The exposure is turned on. And the exposure value, this is something that's different than previous versions of VRay. We used to just have a shutter speed to adjust. The exposure value is a little bit harder to determine. The larger this number is, the lighter the picture tends to be. The smaller this number is, the larger this number is, the darker the picture is. The smaller this number, the lighter the picture would be. So that number plays a factor in what the overall exposure of the camera would be. So if your image, and I have this written out, if you go to 8.19, the physical camera, this will walk you through this. And I have, let's see here. Right, here we go. A higher exposure value will result in a darker image, and a lower exposure value will result in a lighter image. So I would go in increments of about 2 as you start to hone in on what looks right. And so as I look at this, the sky is turning out pretty nice in relation to my sun. I'm getting pretty good reflections off of my buildings. That's pretty good. It's a little dark at street level. I'm not overly worried about that. Looks like the porcelain material, the white porcelain, is more of a brown, so I might go in and tweak that just a little bit and get a little bit more white out of it. But again, that's a personal preference. So we'll let this continue to finish. And once I feel like it's good and the exposure values are good, I can actually increase the size of the rendering and perform a final render. A couple other details that might be relevant is under environment, you also have the ability to adjust how bright or dark the sky is by adjusting this value here next to background. This will come into play much more next class, and I'll show you this again. So if you just stick with the defaults, you're probably okay for today, but I at least like to point it out. Okay, so let's just make sure I got through everything. We did the sun. We did the physical camera to make sure that. Good. So at the end today, I want you to be able to have a higher quality rendering. When we get to these renderings, they can start to take a little bit more time. And because of that, we may choose to turn on what's called the VRay Swarm. This used to be called VRay Distributed Rendering. I had it set up far easier to work with. The new one, there's a lot of automated steps that either work or don't, but I'm going to show you how to turn it on because there's no harm in turning it on. So at the bottom of my VRay asset editor, I have something called Swarm. This Swarm here, I can choose to turn on. And when I turn that Swarm on, it will theoretically go find computers that are not working at there's my auto discovery is turned on, that are not working at their full potential that are on the network, and it will borrow some of their CPU resources to perform a better rendering for you. So that's something that you guys can absolutely turn on as part of your renderings. Okay, so I've gone ahead, I've looked at my particular rendering here. Like I said, it's not about making it perfect, but you can see that it's getting good reflections, etc. So maybe this needs to be a little bit lighter, in which case I'd go back into my camera, right here, and under my exposure value, I want to make it a little bit lighter So in that case, I would decrease this number. Let's go to maybe 11, and I'll perform another test render, small render, and see what the render looks like. So we'll go ahead and let that test render. I'm not going to make you sit here and watch that, but I want you to kind of be aware that that's going to change. This is all going to be much lighter now as a result of that change in the exposure value. So we let it work through it. Hopefully it'll use some of the VRay Swarm. And we will go from there. There you go. You can already see in that upper corner that the sky became much, much lighter. And as a result, the buildings are going to be a lot brighter. So adjusting that exposure value can make a big difference in your final rendering. When it's all done today, actually this one is probably going to be overexposed, too bright, so I'll end up finding another value that's a little bit closer. When you're all done, you can go back to your render output here, and you can increase your size. So I did this test render at 120 by 400. My increased size, I might go up to maybe 1,000 or so. We will ultimately be doing much higher quality renderings than that, but for today's purposes, you don't need much more than that. So I might go up to 1,000 on the larger number as the image that I post. Recognize whenever we start to get into renderings like this, there's downtime where you are letting it render in the background, and that takes a little bit of time for you to let the computer process. That's a great time to work on other things. A lot of you are in 220. You've got plenty to do for 220. Just flip over and work on some 220 for a while and wait for it to render. Okay, I recognize that it takes time, and there will, by necessity, be downtime. Okay? So I'll let you guys start to work. Today's about getting that sun and sky and the city of San Francisco scene in. Yeah, I can already tell here that this is turning out way too light. So in all reality, I should stop the rendering, and I should go back to my camera settings, and we'll try this at about 12.5 or so, and I'll start the render again and see if that one turns out right. Okay, so I'll let you guys go to work. Let me know if you have any questions. And next class, we're going to start working on photorealistic skies, where we have clouds and stuff in the sky. So we'll get to that point as well.